Clara shivered as the cold wind howled outside the small cabin, rattling the windows and making the thin walls groan under its force. She glanced down at her son Liam, who lay curled up on the floor, wrapped in the only blanket they had. His little body was trembling, and his tiny fingers were pale and stiff. She felt a tight knot of fear in her chest, one that had been growing since the storm had started hours ago. The snow had begun early that morning, falling slowly at first, but then it had turned into a white, blinding wall of wind and ice. The temperature outside had dropped fast, and they were unprepared. She had thought they would manage the night easily, but now, with the storm raging, she realized just how dangerous it had become. Clara tried to keep calm, with telling herself she had done everything she could to prepare. She had stocked firewood and extra blankets, but the cold seemed to find its way into every corner of the cabin, seeping through the wooden floorboards and the thin roof. Liam's small body was not built to withstand this kind of weather. Clara could feel her own hands going numb as she held him close, wrapping him in the blanket again and again. She whispered to him softly, trying to keep both of their spirits up, but even as she spoke, her voice trembled with fear. She checked the fire, trying to coax the last embers into warmth, but it wasn't enough. The stove sputtered and hissed, struggling against the relentless wind that screamed outside. She added what little wood she had left, but the room barely warmed. Clara felt her stomach twist with dread as she realized that they were running out of options. There was no way to call for help. Their phones had no signal, and the snow had piled so high that leaving the cabin would have been impossible. It was just her and Liam against the storm. Liam whimpered softly and Clara's heart ached. She stroked his hair, trying to soothe him, but it was difficult to stay composed. She could feel the cold against his tiny body and knew it was stealing his strength slowly. Every shallow breath he took made her panic more, each one a reminder of how fragile he was. She held him closer, pressing her face against his, trying to transfer warmth through her body, willing him to stay awake, to stay alive. Her mind raced with fear and memories of him laughing, running, and talking. She couldn't bear the thought of losing him now, not like this. Not alone in a cold cabin with a storm raging outside. Hours seemed to pass like minutes. She watched him closely, noticing every shiver, every sigh, every small twitch. The cold was merciless, and she felt its presence creeping into her own body. Her hands were stiff, and her feet felt frozen, but she forced herself to ignore the pain. She wrapped him tighter in the blankets, layering them, pressing him against her chest, hoping that her own warmth would help him survive. She hummed softly, a lullaby from her childhood, hoping it would calm him, hoping it would remind him of safety. Her own voice, once strong and steady, now wavered with exhaustion and fear. Clara's mind was a storm of its own. She thought about what she could have done differently, what she could have packed, what signs she might have missed. She kept replaying the events of the day, wondering if she had been careless, and guilt gnawed at her. But there was no time for regrets. Survival was all that mattered now. She focused on each second, each breath, each small rise and fall of Liam's chest. She whispered his name repeatedly, over and over, as if saying it would bring him back to her, keep him with her. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the blankets, pressed them closer around him, and checked his tiny pulse. The wind outside roared like a wild animal, shaking the cabin violently. Every creak and moan of the building sent shivers down Clara's spine. She feared the roof might collapse, feared the snow might break through the windows, but most of all, she feared losing Liam. The sound of his whimper, the faint little movements he made, kept her awake and alert. She refused to look away, even for a second, because in that moment, she knew that any lapse could be fatal. Her instincts screamed at her to fight, to stay awake, to never let go, and she obeyed them, every fiber of her being focused entirely on him. As the hours dragged on, exhaustion began to weigh heavily on Clara. Her body ached, her back stiffened, and her eyelids felt unbearably heavy, but she forced herself to stay awake. She rocked Liam gently, murmured reassurances, and pressed kisses to his forehead. The warmth from her own body seemed to ebb slowly into the blankets, and she hoped it was enough. The storm outside showed no signs of letting up. The cold wind found every crack and corner, and the relentless snow piled higher, making the cabin feel smaller, more confining, more dangerous. She thought about how fragile life could be, how quickly things could turn from normal to deadly, and she felt a deep, almost unbearable fear. Clara remembered the emergency kit she had packed, the small things like bandages, food, and water, but none of it would stop the cold. She considered every option, but the storm was merciless, and time was slipping away. She continued to wrap Liam, adjusting the blankets, pressing him close, whispering words of love and comfort. Her thoughts blurred between reality and panic, between fear and hope, as she desperately tried to shield him from the cold. She watched him carefully, tracking every shiver, every small movement, every shallow breath, knowing that survival depended on her alertness, her determination, and her ability to remain calm despite the terror she felt inside. In that long, frozen night, the bond between Clara and Liam became her anchor. Her maternal instinct, fierce and unwavering, drove her to fight not just for him but with him. She whispered stories, hummed lullabies, and pressed her body against his, drawing every ounce of warmth she could muster. She refused to succumb to despair, though it hovered dangerously close, threatening to pull her into darkness. Every small sound, every faint breath from Liam, was a reminder that she had to keep going, to keep fighting, and that her love could not be measured by fear alone. The night stretched endlessly, a relentless battle between cold and warmth, fear and hope. Clara clung to Liam, wrapped him tighter, and refused to let go. She whispered promises of protection and safety, promises she hoped he could hear and believe. The storm raged, but inside the cabin, a small bubble of warmth, of love, of life, existed because of her determination. Even as the cold bit deeper and the darkness threatened to overtake them, Clara's focus never wavered. All that mattered was Liam, and she would do anything, endure anything, to keep him alive. Clara's body was trembling uncontrollably now, not just from the cold but from sheer exhaustion and fear. She could feel Liam's tiny body growing weaker in her arms. His breathing was faint, shallow and uneven, and every small sound he made filled her heart with terror. She pressed him closer, trying to share her warmth with him, wrapping him in the layers of blankets she had around them. She had stacked everything she could find, extra clothes, scarves, anything soft and thickened. She held him tight, willing heat to flow into his small body. She whispered his name, over and over, as if saying it might magically bring strength back to him. Her voice was small, shaky, but determined. She moved around the cabin carefully, trying not to disturb the little bit of heat that still lingered from the fire. Every step was slow, deliberate, because one wrong move could mean a loss of precious warmth. She thought of all the times she had imagined her son safe and laughing, and that memory fueled her will to survive this nightmare. She could not allow the storm to win, could not allow the cold to take him from her. Her hands were stiff and numb, her arms heavy from holding him for hours, but she refused to set him down. She kept shifting blankets, layering them closer, pressing him against her chest as she tried to share every ounce of body heat she had left. She whispered stories to him, trying to keep his mind, and maybe even his tiny body, awake. She told him about the days they had spent together in the park, the games they had played, the songs he liked to sing. She hoped her words could give him strength. She hummed soft tunes, a rhythm she could keep without thinking, almost like a heartbeat for both of them. The cabin was cold, silent except for the wind outside and her soft voice. Clara's own fear was loud in her chest, pounding, but she tried to keep it hidden from him. Though she knew he could sense it, she checked his pulse frequently, each time feeling panic rising when it was faint, almost disappearing. Her mind raced with calculations. How long could he last like this? How much energy did he have left? She remembered reading somewhere about hypothermia, about how the body shuts down slowly when it gets too cold. She prayed that he could hang on, that her warmth, the blankets, her presence, could be enough to keep him alive until the storm ended. Every breath he took made her heart ache. Each small shiver like a warning. Clara tried to keep her mind focused, telling herself she needed to be strong, that she had to do more. She wrapped him tighter, pressing herself against him as if her own warmth could push the cold out. She imagined a small bubble of heat around them, a safe space where the storm could not reach, and she held on to that image desperately. She rubbed his hands, trying to bring color back to his fingers, moving her lips close to his tiny ears to whisper soothing words. She tried to think of everything she had ever learned about keeping someone warm, from blankets to body heat, to movement, to breathing, and she did all of it. Every small trick she could remember. Time lost all meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, and Clara's body was starting to betray her. She felt weak, shivering violently, and her muscles ached from holding Liam so long. She realized she was also slipping, that if she fell asleep, they could both be in real danger. Fear pushed her to stay awake. Fear pushed her to keep fighting, to keep pressing heat into him, to never let him go. She felt panic rise like a tide, but then she reminded herself to breathe, to focus on what she could control: her own body, the blankets, Liam's small form in her arms. She refused to think about the worst-case scenario. That thought was too heavy to carry right now that the night wore on. Clara started talking to him more, telling him how brave he was, how much she loved him, how she would always protect him. She imagined him hearing her words, imagining warmth and safety even as his body suffered from the cold. She held him close, feeling his small chest rise and fall, each breath a small victory. Every shiver, every faint movement gave her hope, and she clung to that hope as tightly as she clung to him. She reminded herself that she could not give up, that if she gave up, there would be nothing left for either of them. Clara thought about how fragile life could be, how quickly everything could change. One moment they had been safe, happy, and the next, the storm had trapped them, threatened to take everything. She allowed herself a brief flash of anger at the storm, at the world, at the unfairness of it all, but then she pushed it aside. There was no time for anger. Survival required her full attention. She had to focus on him, on keeping him alive. Every shiver she felt, every tremor in his body, was a signal to act, to move, to hold him closer, to wrap him tighter. She used every ounce of energy she had to rub warmth into him, pressing blankets around him, tucking layers under his small body. She even used her own jacket, taking it off and layering it over him. wrapping him like a cocoon. She whispered to him continuously, not just to soothe him, but to keep herself awake. Her voice became her anchor, a reminder that she had a purpose, that she could not let go. She felt tears slip down her face but did not allow herself to cry fully, because crying might weaken her, and she needed all her strength for him. The storm outside continued to rage, a constant, terrifying roar that threatened to overwhelm her senses. Every gust of wind shook the cabin, making the thin walls creak and groan, making her heart race with fear. She imagined the cold as a living thing, trying to reach them, trying to steal the warmth and life from her son. She fought back with everything she had, pressing herself closer, whispering, stroking, holding, never letting go. She felt like the night would never end, like the cold would never release its grip. Hours passed in a blur of fear, exhaustion, and determination. Clara's body ached. Her mind was foggy, but she refused to stop moving, refused to stop trying. Every small breath from Liam, every tiny stir, every faint noise, reminded her why she had to continue. She imagined a future where they survived, where he would laugh again, and that vision gave her strength. She held him tightly, unwilling to let him drift into the darkness, unwilling to accept the thought of losing him. Her maternal instinct had become a fierce shield, wrapping them both in a fragile but powerful cocoon of love, warmth, and determination. Clara could feel the cold trying to creep into her own body, but she did not allow it to weaken her focus. She whispered, hummed and rubbed, trying to push warmth into every inch of his small form. She imagined her love as a shield, a fire that could not be extinguished by snow or wind. She repeated his name, told him he was safe, that she was there, that she would never leave him. She refused to think of the consequences if she failed. She could only think of what she could do in this moment. And in that moment, holding her son, pressing blankets and warmth against him, Clara became something unstoppable, a mother determined to keep her child alive no matter the cost. Clara's eyes fluttered open, and the first thing she noticed was warmth, real, steady warmth, unlike the cold that had consumed her and Liam in the cabin. For a brief moment, she felt disoriented, unsure of where she was or how she had gotten there. The last memories of the storm, of the biting wind and the relentless cold, were still vivid in her mind. She blinked rapidly, trying to focus, and realized she was lying on a soft bed. The sheets smelled faintly of something clean and comforting, a stark contrast to the damp, freezing cabin she had been trapped in. Confusion swirled inside her. She tried to sit up, but her body protested, weak from exhaustion and the cold. Her arms and legs felt like lead, her muscles stiff and trembling. As her senses cleared, Clara became aware of the faint murmur of voices nearby. Soft words, calm and gentle, reached her ears. She turned her head slowly, trying to understand where she was. The room was small but cozy, with a fire burning in a stove and the soft glow of a lamp filling the space. There were people, strangers, moving quietly, checking blankets, offering food, and speaking in soothing tones. Clara's heart raced. Who were these people? How had she ended up here? And most importantly, Liam. Panic rose sharply in her chest. She tried to speak, her voice weak and barely audible, calling out for her son. Her throat felt raw, her lips dry, but she forced herself to form the words. Liam, she croaked, her voice trembling. One of the strangers, a woman with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, approached her. She placed a gentle hand on Clara's shoulder, stopping her from trying to get up too quickly. The warmth of the stranger's touch was comforting, but it did not calm the whirlwind of fear inside Clara. The woman spoke softly, explaining that they had found her near their property, unconscious and freezing. They had carried her inside, laid her on a bed, and tended to her as best as they could. Clara's mind raced, trying to process the information. She remembered the storm, the snow, the desperate hours trying to keep Liam warm, and then the darkness. She had no memory of being moved or rescued. It felt unreal, like she was caught between a nightmare and reality. She tried to ask questions, her voice shaky, but she had to catch her breath first. Her body was still weak from hypothermia and exhaustion, and even simple movements left her dizzy and trembling. The stranger, sensing her anxiety, gently reassured her that her son was safe. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Safe, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of relief and disbelief. The woman nodded and explained that another neighbor had found Liam during the storm, wrapped in blankets, and had kept him safe until she could be located. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, a rush of relief so strong it left her momentarily unable to speak. Relief mingled with guilt for not being able to protect him fully, guilt for the terrifying night they had endured. But above everything else, there was a small, overwhelming spark of hope that Liam was alive. She tried to move, her body weak, but the strangers gently helped her sit up. They offered her water, food, and blankets, speaking softly, patiently, without any rush. Clara's mind was still spinning with confusion and exhaustion, but she clung to the hope that Liam was alive. She thought back to the night in the cabin, the shivering, the fear, the desperate attempts to keep him warm, and now, seeing him safe, she felt a weight lift off her chest, though guilt lingered like a shadow. The realization that strangers had risked their own safety to help them was almost too much to comprehend. Clara's memories of the storm came in fragments, the way the wind had screamed, the snow that had piled high around the cabin, the desperate attempts to keep Liam's small body warm. She relived the panic, the endless shivering, the constant fear of losing him. And now, here she was, in a warm room, surrounded by people she did not know. And yet, somehow, she felt a flicker of safety. She understood that she had not been alone in the fight to survive, even if she had felt utterly isolated during the worst hours of the night. As she adjusted to her Clara began to notice small details that made the scene feel more real. There were blankets folded neatly on a chair, food steaming quietly on a small table, and a fire crackling softly. The strangers moved with care and attention, checking both her and Liam's condition. She realized how fragile life could be, how easily everything could change in an instant, and she felt an overwhelming gratitude for the people who had found them. Every gentle touch, every quiet word, every small act of care reminded her that kindness existed even in the darkest moments. Clara's mind, though foggy from exhaustion, tried to piece together what had happened. She remembered the storm, the cold, the desperate hours spent keeping Liam alive, and then a strange blur, the sensation of being moved, of losing consciousness. She realized that she had been saved, that someone had intervened when she could no longer protect herself or her son. The thought was both comforting and humbling. She wanted to thank the strangers, to express the depth of her gratitude, but words felt insufficient, weak compared to the enormity of what had happened. She focused on Liam, wanting to see him, to confirm that he was truly safe. The strangers reassured her, explaining that he was nearby, wrapped in blankets and resting peacefully. Clara's heart leaped, and she struggled to stand, trembling, weak, and unsteady. The strangers guided her gently, supporting her as she moved. Her hands shook with anticipation and fear, but when she finally saw Liam, safe and sleeping, a wave of relief washed over her. She knelt beside him, brushing the hair from his forehead, feeling the warmth of his body. He was alive. He had survived. She had survived. Tears ran down her face, tears of relief, exhaustion, and gratitude. She held him close, whispering words of love and apology, overwhelmed by the emotions she had bottled up during the long, terrifying night. Every moment of fear, every desperate effort to keep him warm, every shiver and trembling, all led to this, the moment she could feel him safe in her arms again. She could hardly believe it. The storm, the cold, the danger, it had all been real. Yet here they were, alive and together, thanks to the unexpected kindness of strangers. Clara's thoughts slowly began to calm. The fear that had consumed her during the night gradually gave way to gratitude, relief, and reflection. She realized how unpredictable life could be, how quickly danger could arrive, and how small acts of kindness could save lives. She thought about the strangers, about their courage and generosity, and felt a deep sense of humility and awe. They had stepped in when she could no longer fight alone, bridging the gap between despair and survival. As she settled beside Liam, holding him gently, she allowed herself to relax slightly, though the memory of the storm would stay with her forever. She whispered softly, telling him how brave he had been, how much she loved him, and how thankful she was that he was safe. The room was warm, the fire crackled, and for the first time since the storm began, Clara allowed herself to feel hope again. She understood that survival was never just about strength or determination. It was also about the kindness of others, the unseen hands that reached out in moments of need. Clara closed her eyes briefly, feeling the warmth of the room and the steady presence of her son beside her. She allowed herself to imagine a future where they could heal, recover, and return to safety. The fear of the storm and the cold lingered, but it was tempered by relief and gratitude. She knew that the night would remain a haunting memory, but it also reminded her of the resilience of both her and her son, and the extraordinary power of compassion. Clara sat quietly, still holding Liam close, as the strangers explained everything that had happened while she was unconscious. She listened with wide eyes, trying to take in every word, every detail. The woman who had found them spoke gently, telling Clara that she and Liam had been discovered just hours after the storm had hit its peak. A neighbor, who lived a short distance away, had spotted them while checking on the road outside. Snow was piled high everywhere, and visibility was near zero. But the neighbor had seen a small figure struggling against the wind, wrapped in blankets, and immediately recognized that a child and an adult were in danger. Clara's heart pounded as the woman continued. She described how the neighbor had carefully navigated through the snow, moving cautiously to avoid slipping or falling. Until they reached Clara and Liam, they found Clara unconscious, her body trembling violently, and Liam nearly frozen but still breathing. The neighbor had acted quickly, gathering blankets and wrapping Liam carefully, then moving both of them toward the stranger's home, where it was warm and safe. Clara could barely process the words. Her mind replayed the night, the storm, the cold, the desperate attempts to keep Liam alive, and now she realized that there had been someone else fighting for them while she could not. The woman paused and looked at Clara with kind, steady eyes. She explained that when Clara was found, she was barely conscious, hypothermia setting in fast, her body exhausted and dangerously cold. Liam had been incredibly fragile, and if the neighbor had arrived even minutes later, the outcome could have been very different. Clara's throat tightened, and tears formed in her eyes. She was overwhelmed by the thought that they had been so close to tragedy. And yet, through the courage and quick thinking of a stranger, they had survived. The magnitude of what had happened began to sink in, and Clara felt a mixture of relief, awe, and an almost unbearable gratitude as the stranger continued speaking. Clara learned more about the efforts made to ensure both of them were safe. They had given Liam warm blankets, made sure he was covered head to toe, and held him close until she regained consciousness. They had fed him small amounts of warm water and monitored his breathing carefully. Clara felt a rush of emotion relief that he had been kept safe, awe at the calm and care shown by people she did not even know, and guilt that she had felt so helpless. Despite doing everything she could in the cabin, she clung to Liam tighter, feeling his warmth and realizing that he had survived because others had stepped in when she could. Clara asked questions, her voice trembling, desperate to understand exactly how it had all happened. She wanted to know how long Liam had been outside, how he had been kept safe, and why they had come to their rescue. The stranger answered patiently, explaining that it had been sheer luck that the neighbor was outside at that time, checking on the road. The snowstorm was fierce, visibility near zero, but somehow they had noticed movement through the white haze. Clara's mind whirled at the thought of what might have happened if the neighbor had not been there, if the timing had been just a little different. Her heart raced, her chest tight with both gratitude and fear. Clara learned that the stranger who had brought her to their home had acted quickly to prevent further harm. They had laid her on the bed, checked her pulse, and kept her warm with blankets and hot packs. They had not known her, had not been required to help, yet they had risked themselves to ensure her survival. Clara's eyes filled with tears again, this time from the realization that human kindness could be so selfless, so powerful. She could barely find the words to thank them. She realized that, in that moment, strangers had become her lifeline, the invisible hands that had saved her and her son from disaster. The story of the neighbor's bravery and the stranger's care sank deep into Clara's mind. She began to understand that survival had not been her battle alone. Every instinct, every effort she had made in the cabin had been vital, but it had been supplemented, strengthened, by the courage and quick thinking of others. Her gratitude was overwhelming. She wanted to express it fully, to somehow repay them, but she realized that some acts of kindness were beyond repayment. All she could do was accept it, honor it, and never forget it. Clara's mind drifted to Liam, watching him sleep peacefully under the blankets, his small chest rising and falling with steady breaths. She marveled at the resilience of children, at the fragile strength that had allowed him to endure the storm. She reflected on the terrifying night in the cabin, the hours she had spent keeping him warm, whispering stories, pressing blankets to his tiny body, and how every moment of fear had led to the calm, the warmth, the safety that now surrounded them. She realized that the fear and danger had created a bond between them, deep and unbreakable, and that it had been made stronger by the acts of strangers who had cared for them without hesitation. As she listened to the stranger explain the full sequence of events, Clara began to process the lessons of the night. She understood that life was unpredictable, that danger could arrive suddenly, and that sometimes survival depended not only on determination but also on the empathy of others. The courage of the neighbor, the selflessness of the strangers, had been as critical to their survival as her own tireless efforts. She felt humbled by the realization that even when everything seemed lost, human kindness could create miracles, could provide life-saving support when it was needed most. Clara also reflected on her own feelings during the storm, the panic, the exhaustion, the fear that she would lose her son, and how those emotions had driven her to act, to fight for him with every ounce of strength she had. Now, seeing the outcome, she understood that her determination, combined with the intervention of others, had created a balance that allowed both her and Liam to survive. It was a powerful reminder that life was rarely the result of one person's effort alone. Survival, sometimes, was a shared achievement. The strangers continued to explain how they had coordinated to make sure both Clara and Liam were stable. They had checked Liam repeatedly, ensured that he stayed warm, and waited patiently until she regained consciousness. Clara was struck by the calm efficiency of their care, the way they had acted without panic, with empathy and precision. She realized how fortunate they had been, not just because of the stranger's actions but because of the timing, the quick decisions, and the genuine concern that guided every move. The thought that she had almost lost her son was terrifying, but the reality that he had been saved by the compassion of others brought a deep sense of relief. Clara finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of gratitude. She looked around the room, at the strangers who had risked their own safety to help her and her child. She felt humbled, deeply moved, and almost overwhelmed by the enormity of their actions. Her love for Liam, already immense, was now paired with an understanding of the unseen hands that had supported them. She realized that she had witnessed not only survival but also the power of empathy, courage, and selflessness in its most human form. She stayed close to Liam, feeling the warmth of his body and reflecting on the story she had just heard. The storm, the cold, the hours of fear and desperation, all of it now had context. It had been terrifying, exhausting, and almost unbearable. But it had ended with life, with safety, and with the realization that people she did not know had cared enough to act when it mattered most, Clara understood that she would never forget this night, the people who saved them, or the lesson that sometimes the kindness of strangers can make the difference between life and death. In the quiet moments that followed, Clara gently kissed Liam's forehead and whispered words of love and gratitude. She thought about how fragile and precious life was, how quickly it could be threatened, and how vital it was to cherish every moment. The storm was over for now, but the memory of it, and the actions of the strangers, would stay with her forever. She felt a renewed sense of hope and a deep appreciation for the resilience of both herself and her son, and for the people who had stepped in to save them when it seemed all hope was lost. Clara sat quietly beside Liam, holding him close, feeling the steady warmth of his small body against her own. The events of the past hours replayed endlessly in her mind: the storm, the cold, the desperate struggle to keep him alive, and then the blur of being rescued and waking up in a stranger's home. Relief and gratitude mingled with exhaustion and lingering fear, creating a complex storm of emotions inside her. She pressed her face gently against Liam's hair, inhaling the familiar scent of her child, the warmth and life that she had fought so desperately to protect. She could feel the rhythm of his breathing, slow but steady, and it filled her with a profound sense of relief and quiet awe. The strangers who had rescued them continued to move around the small home, tending to simple tasks like stoking the fire, checking the blankets, and preparing warm drinks. Clara observed them, noting how quietly and efficiently they worked, without any expectation of thanks or recognition. Each small action reinforced the reality that her survival and Liam's success had been made possible by the courage and compassion of people she had never met before. She reflected on the storm itself, the white blinding snow, the wind cutting like knives, the sense of isolation in the cold cabin, and understood how close they had come to losing everything. Clara thought about the hours she had spent in the cabin, cradling Liam, wrapping him in layers of blankets, whispering stories and lullabies, and pressing every ounce of her warmth into him. She remembered the fear, the panic, and the exhaustion that had threatened to overwhelm her. Now, in the safety of this warm home, she realized that her determination had been only one part of the survival story. The stranger's timely intervention had been just as crucial. Her gratitude for them was overwhelming, a deep and unshakable emotion that she would carry with her forever. As the moments passed, Clara gently began to speak to Liam, though he was still drowsy and weak. She told him how brave he had been, how much she loved him, and how grateful she was that he was safe. Her voice trembled with emotion, soft but filled with intensity, as if every word could convey the depth of her love and relief. Liam stirred slightly in response, curling closer to her, and she felt a small but powerful reassurance that he was alive, that he had survived. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, feeling the softness of his hair and the warmth of his skin, and silently vowed that she would never take a moment of safety and life for granted again. Clara began to reflect more broadly on the nature of life and human connection. She thought about how fragile life could be, how a single storm, a single moment of misfortune, could threaten everything she held dear, and yet, she realized, life was also sustained by acts of kindness, courage, and empathy. The strangers who had rescued them had not known her, had not been required to act, and yet they had risked their own comfort and safety to help. Clara's heart swelled with gratitude, and she understood, in a profound and personal way, that survival is rarely the work of one person alone. Her thoughts returned to the stormy night in the cabin. She remembered the shivering, the cold that had penetrated every layer of her clothing, the frantic attempts to keep Liam warm, and the fear that had clawed at her chest every moment. She realized now how close she had come to losing him, how fragile he had been, and how miraculous it was that they had both survived. The memory of the cold and darkness made her squeeze him tighter, feeling the steady warmth of his body, grounding her in the reality of their survival. She whispered softly to him, telling him stories, recalling happy memories, and letting him feel the safety that was now surrounding them. Clara slowly allowed herself to consider the future. The storm had passed, and though the memory of it would remain, life was now moving forward. She imagined leaving the stranger's home, returning to familiar surroundings, and rebuilding the sense of normalcy that had been shattered. She thought about the lessons she had learned, the importance of vigilance, the fragility of life, and the extraordinary power of human kindness. Each thought reinforced her sense of gratitude, not just for the survival of her son and herself, but for the realization that even in moments of despair, there are people willing to act with courage and compassion. Clara also thought about the bond that had been strengthened between her and Liam. The night of terror and fear had forged a connection deeper than she had ever imagined. She understood, more fully than ever, the responsibility she carried as a mother, and the lengths to which she would go to protect her child. Holding Liam close, feeling his steady breathing, she vowed to herself that she would never take for granted the gift of life, the warmth of his body, or the moments of safety that now surrounded them. Each breath they shared was a reminder of how precious life truly was. The strangers continued to move quietly around them, offering gentle words and small acts of care, but Clara's attention remained on Liam. She observed him closely, noting the color returning to his cheeks, the slight movement of his tiny fingers, the soft sound of his breathing. She allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection, realizing that while fear had dominated the night, hope and compassion had prevailed. Survival had been the result of love, determination, and the unexpected courage of strangers who had acted without hesitation. Clara's mind wandered to thoughts of gratitude beyond the immediate situation. She thought about family, friends, and the community she lived in, and how quickly life could change, how suddenly the familiar could become dangerous. She resolved to cherish every moment, to honor the lives she had been given to live, and to carry forward the lessons of empathy and courage she had witnessed. The realization that people she had never met could risk so much for her and Liam had left an indelible mark on her soul as the warmth of the fire enveloped them. Clara slowly began to relax further, her body no longer trembling from exhaustion and fear. She allowed herself to imagine a future where she and Liam could heal, recover, and continue their lives with a renewed appreciation for life itself. She reflected on the night's events, understanding that fear and determination alone had not been enough. They had survived because human kindness and bravery had intervened at exactly the right moment. That thought filled her with awe, reverence, and deep, abiding gratitude. Clara's thoughts shifted to the simple moments of recovery, drinking warm tea, resting by the fire, and regaining strength. She knew that the physical ordeal was over, but the emotional and mental impact would remain. She allowed herself to feel the relief fully, to sit with Liam, to appreciate the miracle of their survival. Every heartbeat, every breath, every small movement reminded her that they had made it through the storm alive, and that their lives were precious and fragile. She promised herself that she would live with intention, with awareness of life's fragility, and with gratitude for every act of kindness that had helped them survive. Finally, Clara looked at Liam, sleeping peacefully, and whispered promises of protection and love. She reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them from the brink of tragedy to safety: the storm, her desperate struggle to keep him warm, the neighbor who had discovered them, and the strangers who attended to them with care. She understood that their survival had been a shared achievement, a combination of determination, courage, and empathy. And in that quiet moment, Clara felt a profound connection to life, to the people who had helped them, and to the enduring power of love and hope.